What's up, Buttercup? Welcome back to my channel. Today's book review is The Táin, or The Cattle Raid of Cúailnge by Anonymous, though this edition is translated by Karen Carson, and it's one of the few translations of this particular story. This is one of the best known Irish epics, about 2,000 years old, give or take. It's the centerpiece of the Ulster cycle of heroic tales. The story centers around a couple of characters that you might or might not have heard of because they're pretty popular. One of them is Queen Maeve, and she wants the Great Brown Bull so she can one-up her husband because they did an inventory of all of their goods, and it turns out he had one bull better than her. The audacity, apparently, which I just think that's so hilarious. It's the first chapter, and for some reason there are a lot of past translations that leave out that first chapter. Kind of sets up the whole point of this story, so I'm not completely sure why they would leave that out, but it is just full of humor and sarcasm, and it's just overall hilarious. So I'm glad that this translator included the first chapter of this tale, because if I would have read that story without that first part, it wouldn't really make sense. But with the whole story, it makes perfect sense in a way. I think it's stupid, but like there's a reason, right? Whether you agree with Queen Maeve or not, we have a reason to go forth into Ulster and steal the brown bull. The other main character, and really the star of the show, is Cúailnge, the Hound of Ulster, and the Irish version of Hercules, who fights back the invaders single-handedly while all the other Ulstermen are unavailable to help because they are sick with a curse, which is another really interesting epic tale in the Ulster cycle. I haven't read the other translation of this tale, but I think this one is done very well. I didn't give a rating for this story because it's so old, and I really don't give old stories or poems or short stories ratings, but I definitely recommend this particular translation. I can't say about the other translations, but if you come across a translation that does not involve Queen Maeve and her husband going back and forth about their goods and how she's better than him and vice versa, and oh, we gotta prove it, so then they do an inventory and then they figure out that her husband has one better bull than her, and that kickstarts off the whole situation, you need to find another translation. I think it's just, like I said, really bizarre if you don't include that translation in the full text. So you need that first part to make sense of everything else. Now, a few of my issues with the storytelling probably has to do with, one, the age of the story, and how the Irish put together their stories, which is different, of course, from the modern storytelling, and then also the translation. I think a piece of text is the best in its original form, but I cannot read Old Irish, and only some people can do so. There are lots of instances where there's a list of a person's grand lineage, and sometimes it's a full page. And I'm sorry, I'm not reading that full page of just names. I'm not. I skimmed it. Okay. It doesn't make sense to me, and maybe it makes sense to very specific scholars of Ireland, but I think for the most part, it's not going to make sense to 99% of people that are reading this story. But you know what? I appreciate it, because I don't think whoever wrote this or told it orally, because the Irish did not write things down for quite some time, and however old it is, I'm thinking a few thousand years, not 100% sure about the history there because it was orally told, but I know that there is a point in that, and during this time when it was orally spoken, that whole list made perfect sense. There were also long lists of directions. Queen Maeve and her army going to one place and how to get there, then arriving and then being beaten by Cúailnge, and then we move the army over here, and here's a long list of directions on how to get there. That's another thing that I skimmed over. It actually probably would make more sense if you were in Ireland and or just outright from Ireland. I've only visited Dublin, Ireland, and that was in 2011, and it was for 2 nights. I have no idea about these directions or this particular road or that particular lake, you know, things like that. But in this instance, if you have been in Ireland for a while or you grew up in Ireland, that part might make more sense to you. But that particular sharing of the directions happened so much that I did honestly check out. But when this was spoken aloud, like I said, with the names, that would have been way more important and interesting to the listeners. There's also a bit of a saggy middle where there's a lot of chatting and not much action, and then it picks up really fast, and I think a bit too fast, though I love seeing bits of Queen Maeve fighting in the final battle. There were quite a few queens and female warriors, real and made up, throughout Celtic history, myths, legends, and specifically in this case, Irish queens and Irish female warriors. And I think it's pretty cute seeing Queen Maeve fighting alongside her husband, even though I thought that she was acting like a fool. They are pretty equal, and the whole point is that she is the queen and then he is her husband, but also a king, but they're not on the same level, and that's the point of why she's so angry. He has something, even if it's one thing, more than her. So she needs to equal it out again, and that means the brown bull of Cooley must be in her possession to be greater than, or at least equal to, but basically she's trying to one up her husband because she's the queen and he is a husband king consort in a way. I understand, like, to a certain extent, girlfriend, I do. But Queen Maeve went out thinking it'd be fine to steal a very prized bull, but also just raid everything going to the brown bull. No, bad. That was a bad idea. Because it turns out Cúailnge absolutely wrecks her army and her allies. Granted, he's about 16 years old in this story, so I get the idea of everyone thinking they'd outdo the Hound of Ulster, but they learned the hard way. And he is blessed magically. He's mortal, but I won't spoil how or why or anything like that, but that is how he's able to take on her army. And it's not like him and 5,000 people. No, it's him and prized warriors going at him one-on-one, sometimes in small groups. So just keep in mind, it's not like he's completely wrecking thousands of people. No, it's, in this way, it is showing up with a pretty significantly big group of strong, prized warriors, and they're going up against Cúailnge, and they are losing basically every time. There are some instances where it takes a long time to have Cúailnge win, and that is showcased, and I think that's really interesting to showcase it, but he still ultimately wins, and those warriors, like the other ones, are killed, and he is undefeated. Speaking of the Hound of Ulster, I do love Cúailnge, so it was great to see one of the best known stories about the Hound of Ulster. I like getting deeper into seeing his origin story and how he acts in the original text. It's not original because it was originally spoken and things change over time, and then Catholic priest wrote down these stories, so it's probably not the original. They often sanitized these stories. At least we have them. Love to see it, but it's probably not the original. And he could have very well been more sexual or more violent or maybe more caring. Like, we don't know, but at least from what we've got, I still love Cúailnge. I learned about him from Morgan Llewellyn years ago, who's an Irish-American author, and she wrote a book on his life from childhood all the way up to his death. I saw a lot of connections in this story and in her rendition of Cúailnge, so I had a lot of nostalgic feelings during my read of the Táin. Though it dragged a little out at times, overall I really enjoyed this book and I highly recommend it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!